So I have time. So I first watched a talk for Mohammed. He used to work at Cash App, which is a company owned by Block, if I'm correct, right? By Square. Square became Block later on, but it was Square at the time. So I watched a talk of him online, of course. I wasn't in Canada. He lives in Canada. And I was amazed by it. So I asked him to come join us at Xpand, and he graciously accepted. Thank you to Mohammed Ridwan, and welcome to the stage. Thank you.
All right. Let's see. Can you guys hear me? Good? Okay, excellent. Awesome. Okay. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Beautiful time in Jordan, first of all. I spent the past week here in Amman, in Petra, and a few others. My first time here in the Levant region. So thank you so much for the Xpand team for hosting us here today. Mohammed, Rand, Tambi, right? And also little Lily, who graced her with our presence yesterday. So thank you very much. And can I have a round of applause for the Xpand team here? And thank you very much, everyone. Cool. So before I start today, I wanted to just read the room a little bit and just figure out, I know we have a lot of product people here today. How many here are working on very early stage products? If you can raise your hands. Very early stage. Very early stage, couple of few people. Okay, and Tambi as well. Great, okay, good. And how many here are kind of working in product market kind of fit? You know, you are expanding, you're scaling, kind of feel like there's some product market fit. Okay, excellent. And then I assume majority of the rest of the folks are working on products that are pretty well established. So this is good because my talk today is actually going to be for anyone who is keen on building a product-led organization, including new generation of product managers or product-oriented folks who are entering into the world of entrepreneurship, whether by building their own company or leading brand new products within a larger organization. Hopefully, I can take you from that little tiny chicken to that very strong chicken over there afterwards to deal with incumbents. For more well-established product people here who are in the room, if you feel that your product needs some more oomph, or maybe you feel like you aren't innovating fast enough, right? Hopefully my talk will cover some of that. Now, I cannot guarantee that I'll be as funny as our friend Dylan yesterday. My wife says that I don't have a funny bone in me, but what I can guarantee you is that by the end of this talk, you will come away with few key insights and philosophies that will help you create a world-class product organization. So, to preface my talk is titled Product Management for Early Stage Companies. To be able to understand that a little bit, I just wanted to give a little bit of history so that we're all in the same page here. You see, most of the content that we see online or on courses or product management courses that we take, like Reforge, Google, etc., they're all really built for late-stage organization with massive headcounts, right? And there are very few resources today that cover how to do product well at a very early stage company. And this actually happens for a few good reasons. Let's just look at the history of product management here. If you see, the way product management came about was in the early 20th century, Procter & Gamble introduced the concept of what they called the brand man or the product man, okay? And this was when Procter & Gamble is a company that started in 1837, and this is early 20th century. They changed this title primarily because they wanted business managers to go away from leading a business org to leading a specific line of consumer products. We then moved on to the mid-20th century where this brand man expanded into consumer goods, where we had companies like General Electric, IBM, others, who had different aspects of product being built, and they wanted someone who would focus on market research, product development, and marketing strategies. Then comes 1970s to 1980s, which is the rise of Microsoft at that time, one of the first companies to properly term the product management role, right, and introduce that as part of their key cycle. Again, at a stage where Microsoft already had hundreds and thousands of employees already. Finally, the last two stages in 1990s and 2000s, where we got introduced to Agile and Scrum development, which I'm sure all of you are familiar with. And then 2000s is when companies like Google came in and introduced the APM role and really solidified the position of product management. Now, the problem we see today is that a lot of what we know as product or product principles is actually shaped by massive conglomerates in each one of these stages. Every single person or company in this stage was all a massive conglomerate already. And this is problematic for a founder like me because I have spent majority of my career in software engineering and product management at larger organization, but now running my own company, I'm required to lead a product-led organization with less than 1% of the resources that a Microsoft would have. So their principles that led to the product management role doesn't necessarily apply to me. So that's what we will cover today. We will cover how to modify the PM approaches we have learned from these massive companies and apply it to smaller stage companies and see how we can modify that. Okay. A little bit of introduction. Tommy already gave a little bit of introduction for me. My name is Mohammed Ridwan, or Radwan, depending on if you're from the GCC or the Levant region. In my career, I've worked in various roles. I started in design during the Adobe Photoshop 5 days. Then I got exposed to game design, where that was my introduction to software engineering, learning C#. And then I moved into studying computer engineering at Canada, worked for various companies, including Shopify and machine learning infrastructure product management. And then finally, my company got acquired by Square, or Block now, right? And over there, I worked in the strategic development team, working in B2C product management. Currently, I'm the founder and chief operating officer at a company called Pluto. I'll give you a little bit of introduction about Pluto. Pluto is the #1 corporate card and enterprise spend management software built specifically for Middle East. We started off in UAE and are actually now expanding into Jordan, Qatar, Kuwait, and a few other regions. We're a fintech that helps businesses pay, get paid, and control their finances in one platform. And we've been able to do that and serve some of the largest finance teams in the UAE and surrounding regions. And we've been able to do that with an extremely small team, which is a team of just about 19 people in the company, which serves about 500 organizations with just 1 product member and 1 design team member and just 10 engineers. Okay? So I'll give you a little bit of how we organized our product teams to be able to achieve those metrics today. I've been fortunate to work directly with marketing teams, with sales, with engineering and design, and so hopefully all of this will come together to be able to talk about this today. Okay, so for all the product people here, all of these things are probably very familiar. Sprint planning, retrospectives, story points, backlog grooming, right? We have thousands and thousands of these frameworks out there in the world. And this includes an endless barrage of just documenting, writing, frameworks, grooming, etc. And that is all in the name of progress, right? Unfortunately, in early stage product development, it's really easy to get bogged down by the weight of these kind of processes if you aren't careful. You can quickly fall into the trap of busy work, all right? I still remember being in a startup where I had a product lead who came in from a larger organization, and the company at that time was hardly doing any revenue at all. Yet myself and my engineering team members, like the person before me, we would be stuck in a room with this product lead for 2 hours every 2 weeks doing dot voting, doing scoring of cards, doing estimations, like you mentioned earlier, right? To just get consensus on what to do next. And that to me was extremely surprising because we're spending so much time on process, even though the nature of a startup is to build, iterate, to find the next maxima that you can go into. So rituals such as these are actually terrible for early stage product businesses, as it drains one of the biggest moats that we have as a startup, which is momentum, right? So these frameworks and approaches, I'm not trying to say that they don't work at all. They do work for very late stage companies and companies that are doing in a maintenance mode. But it's really important to understand where in the life cycle you are, right, to be able to see if that fits in. When we followed those approaches, we faced tons of problems, and I'll talk about some of the problems that we faced. Number one is that we saw momentum slowing down, slower pace in decision making, and just overall grogginess and less motivation from the team, as we pointed out. What we realized is that meticulous and detailed product planning actually did not work at all, right? And the reason is that in a startup, new information is discovered almost every single day, right? What you learned last week may actually make your current week's plan completely obsolete, and you need to be okay with that, right? What we then found out is that meticulous documentation was a complete waste of time as well. Documentation in a startup is never final anyways, because if you had all of that answer from the get-go, you wouldn't be building a startup at the moment, right? Some people argued that, we will need to refer to this documentation later, but I can guarantee you that many of you folks have never looked back at a PRD that was super well-written for a very long time, right? We then found out that specs and others, they took too long to write, including PMs would spend tons of time writing the specs, and they would feel discomfort if someone gives them new information to be able to change the specs. And that's just because of inertia, right? I spend all this time writing this beautiful document, right? And then you come around and tell me that I need to make changes to it, right? We also find out that discovery at the moment of implementation started to become frowned upon. Our engineering team, our design team would discover new information as they're building it, but it started to become frowned upon to be able to change our roadmaps to be able to do that. After that, along with all of these problems, we found that when we hired folks from larger companies, the PMs and designers tended to work at too high level, and the engineering teams tended to work at too low level, away from the key problems. What that led to is a handoff process from product to design and engineering that was just all over the place. Product would know the business problems, but engineering would be completely away from that, so that when it came to minute decisions that engineering team had to make, they wouldn't be empowered to be able to make that, and they would have to go back to product and design and engineering again. This led to a kind of like a cyclic hell for us, because engineers had low empathy, because they were never given it in the first place. They go back to PMs or designers for minute decisions, and then we have to end up hiring more and more PMs and designers to just manage that, which just led to more process hell. Last thing, we found out that traditional sprint planning and road mapping tended to become more output-oriented versus outcome-oriented. What I mean by that is that every single sprint, we would look at how many tickets did we complete? What is the next tickets that we're going to do, right? I'm sure many of you have used Jira or anything else. We just look at the next tickets that need to be. How many tickets have I completed as a front-end engineer? Horrible. The number of tickets that you complete doesn't really lead to any of the outcomes that you as a startup need to do or try to achieve for. So traditional sprint planning led all of our mindset to move into more output-oriented, like a factory, as opposed to thinking about outcomes, which we will cover in a little bit more details. My friend before already talked about RICE being a really bad method of estimation, so I'm not going to cover that right now. Okay. So I talked about some of the problems, but why does this typically happen? I think this is the fundamental question that we asked ourselves as we started to scale our company from a startup to a scale-up right now. Let's take backlog and traditional sprint planning as an example. The way traditional approaches have been structured is the following. You do long-term, quarter-based roadmap planning. You do roadmap planning, which typically sounds like we will do this, then we will do that, and then that will lead to this. You do backlog grooming to get through the endless barrage of things that you need to do or have been put into your backlog. But what do you notice out of all of these narratives that I'm saying? You notice a narrative of we do this and then that, a very linear approach to work. But unfortunately, at a startup, more often than not, the reality is that a linear approach, a linear journey completely doesn't work. And instead, most roadmaps actually end up looking like the honest roadmap in the middle, okay? The honest roadmap states, as you can see here, I don't know if you can see it, by Pavel, he says that the honest roadmap states that we know where we are today, and we have a generally good idea about the near future, but we recognize that the future is uncertain, and that's why our roadmap needs to account for that. In fact, most trajectories actually look like the following within a startup, right? Because most of the times, you have a grand vision of what the world looks like, but the execution requires significant iteration where you may go back and forth. This is where long-term quarterly planning and others do not really fit in, because long-term quarterly planning assumes that the time you're investing into planning is value adjusted to the risk of all these plans falling apart in a few months. In a startup, you are operating in timescale of days, not in months. If there's any VCs here, you know that most startups operate in either a 18 to 24-month runway. If you are doing quarterly planning, you are implicitly stating that I am so certain about the 20% of my startup journey's committed lifeline that I'm willing to put it in paper as a roadmap with the current information that I have. The more time you spend on this, the more you're saying that I am extremely certain that these events will happen in 3 months, which unfortunately is very rarely the case. Another example of this is solidified opinions in PRDs. I have a bone to pick with PRDs, where I said earlier that traditional PRDs often suffer from the lack of flexibility, because if you're writing multiple page documents, it is extremely difficult for the owner to be able to make the changes. And we forget that the role of a PM is to carry out a risk-adjusted approach to revenue growth, which means that we should be able to make changes on the go as needed. All right. So now, again, just to repeat myself, now these rituals are not all bad, right? And in fact, these rituals work very well for late-stage companies. So now that we know this, what do we do about it, and how do we fix it, and how do we run our startup accordingly and grow the company and the product organization? So that's what we will talk about right now. But to be able to do this, as I mentioned, traditional methods work at a later stage, but not at the early stage. So the first thing you need to do as a startup is actually figure out what stage of the product market fit journey that you're in. And that requires you to understand what are the few stages. I particularly like this definition by First Round Capital, which states that there are 4 stages of product market fit. The first stage is nascent. This is your MVP, right? You likely have 0 to no customers. You probably have a few customers who are kind of excited about what you're doing, and you need to focus on satisfaction of these 5 to 10 customers that are there, okay? Second stage is developing, where you have a good traction. I know that we talked about product market kind of fit at the beginning with some folks here raising their hands, right? And now you're focusing on meeting the demand while making sure that your costs don't increase significantly. Number 3 is strong PMF. This is the scale-up journey, where your goal is now to just scale up to try and meet the demand as much as possible. And then number 4 is extreme PMF, where you're a more established company, like the most famous unicorns of the world, like Uber or any of the others. And here in the extreme PMF stage, you'd be focused on all 3 of the above, beyond that. Okay. We're going to go through each one of these stages, but we will particularly focus on the first 2 stages, okay, and how to navigate that product at that point. Okay, so at the nascent stage, this is your earliest phase. You just started. You're likely to have little to no customers and have a loose idea of the general direction you want to go. The first thing that you need to do at this stage is deciding your operating principles. Now, at this stage, likely you either have early team members or you have your founding team members. And here, deciding on your operating principles is going to guide how you build your company all throughout the journey. When we first started Pluto, we put these 4 principles here together, okay? So I'm going to go through them, and you can build your own principles from that point onwards. Number 1, for us, we decided that momentum in a startup is everything. While building before, we found that you may never have the most perfect answer, but if you can maintain momentum for a long enough time frame, things kind of sort themselves out. So optimizing for momentum was a key part of our operating principle, okay? Number 2 is over there, so I'm going to talk about that first, which is keep the ship small. Now, we are a venture-backed business, right? We have raised upwards of $7 million so far, and it could be very easy for us to just burn that money, hire as much people, try to go wild as much, and sometimes VCs do expect that. But that was during the ZERP era a few years back, but instead now we're more focused towards being a more cash flow positive and good business. So we decided internally that such a business model is not sustainable. While growth is our objective, quarter over quarter, we fundamentally believe that with new tools and automation and more, we can continue to scale our output as team members while trying to keep the team as small as possible. Number 3 is optimizing for decentralized execution, okay? Keeping teams small that you will no longer have middle managers or wasteful roads, which is over there. If you are keeping your team very small, likely that you will have no middle managers. And if you have no middle managers, it would mean that every single person within your team needs to have the capacity and be empowered to be able to make appropriate decisions. So we'll cover how to do that in a bit. And then over there, the one that I missed, which is be comfortable with the idea that PMF requires iterations. And we'll cover how to structure your company to be able to do that as well. Okay, let's go through operating principle number 1. Momentum is everything. So if momentum is everything, how do we structure our company today to be able to support that? All right? Okay, there we go. Okay. To build momentum at this very early stage, there are a few key things that you need to understand, because right now in stage 0, you're in the MVP stage. And one really important thing that I see here, founders often make the mistakes, is that as they're trying to build their MVP, they try to build the MVP in a way to optimize for earning as much revenue as possible. However, at this stage, your goal should actually not be to earn. Building MVPs at this stage should be optimized for learning about your market. So what do I mean by that? You need to build your MVP so that you learn about the market, you learn about your customer a bit more, learn about user behaviors. Your goal is not to earn. If revenue comes along with it, then great. This is the fundamental shift we had to make and align our team. Because at that stage, we had teammates who wanted to focus on really short-term revenue growth opportunities as opposed to focusing on more discovery-oriented product-led work that we were doing. We didn't want to prematurely optimize towards a particular product. We knew that we had a particular vision in mind, but there could be multiple ways to get to that vision. So at the beginning of Pluto, we built many different things in a very small scale. We intentionally put things in our roadmap as what-ifs. What if this happens? What if someone starts to use this particular feature in this particular way? One really good example of this was our WhatsApp bot. We had a decision to make here in the Pluto journey where we had to decide whether or not we're going to support a mobile app within our company for our product. Now, many of the mobile engineers would know that if you are supporting a mobile app, it would require you to have a separate deployment cycle, right, across web and mobile, right? It means significant amount of DevOps issues that you might face when it comes to production level. And it means that complete slowdown on your overall company because now you have to design for mobile as well as web. So that's a burden that we didn't want to take. What we wanted instead was figuring out an alternative. So we asked ourselves, well, the Levant and the GCC region, WhatsApp is one of the most used products in the market. So what if you could actually run all of your finances on WhatsApp as opposed to run it on your mobile app? Now, if we went to our customers and asked them, would you like a mobile app or would you like a WhatsApp bot? They would say, what the hell is a WhatsApp bot? Never heard of it, right? Because running your finance function from your WhatsApp, that's not something you can compute just by talking about it, right? So instead what we did is we pretended that this is a WhatsApp bot. We built a very small scale MVP, shipped it out to all of our customers, took us about 3 to 4 days, and we asked ourselves, what if everything could be run through WhatsApp? Our customers started using it, and to our surprise, customers started using our WhatsApp bot way more than they started using our web service. What that made us realize is that if we just spend the next few days just optimizing and scaling this WhatsApp bot, we can completely ignore the mobile app for as long as possible until it is absolutely necessary. That's an example of building an MVP where you're asking yourself, what if I do this and that happens? You are creating space in your roadmap to be able to discover new user behavior, because not all user behavior can be discovered by just asking people questions, okay? So stage number one is reorienting your team in this particular approach so that they are empowered to put in discovery-led features within your roadmap. Okay. Number two, scrapping heavy PRDs. All the PMs here was gonna hate me because this is what their output is every single day, right? But at Pluto, we don't do PRDs. Historically, the PRD used to be the thing that product management team used to take on as the key deliverable. However, what we found is that PRDs tend to be, again, too heavy and too long to write. Because they take so long to write, the owner tends to avoid changes due to inertia. So we started to rethink how we do PRDs. We realized that PRDs usually just need to satisfy 3 different criteria. Number one is, have I clearly thought about the problem and the various solutions? Number two is, have I identified clearly what success is like, and do I have a way to get it communicated to the people here? And number three is, for the people working on this project, will this artifact provide all the clarity? When we broke down what a PRD does in these 3 stages, we realized that at the early stage in a product, you don't really need a long documentation. Instead, what you need are more fluid methods. So instead, this is what our PRDs look like. Our PRDs actually live on Figma. We barely write any documentation. Most of our PRDs are on Figma. Here, what happens is 1 or 2 people get into a room, start brainstorming the problem that we're trying to solve, the various solutions that can be there, and the advantage this has over any PRD is that it's mixed media, which means I can start to wireframe here, I can start to draw things, I can start to experiment with processes, mind maps, etc., while everything is very iterative and fluid. By virtue of this being on Figma, as opposed to a very strong written document that you're sending to your management or somewhere else, you're also implicitly telling everyone that, hey, this is just a draft. Don't worry about it, okay? This is just a way for me to communicate to you what I'm kind of thinking about, right? And that's where you want to be, because you don't want a solid structure that is there, because tomorrow you may discover some new information that can completely scrap this off and change it completely, okay? So hopefully that gives you a little bit of idea. I know you can't see it here, but I'll be here at the end of the talk to talk to you more about this in detail if this is something of interest to you. All right, next thing is deeper handoffs. We talked about, before my talk, we talked about how engineers need to be empowered. And what I'm talking about here is actually a little bit more on the reverse, where at Pluto, the product and design teams are actually empowered to make engineering decisions. So it's a little bit different from how most companies operate. When we look for a product manager or a designer, we expect that person to have some level of technical understanding. We actually think of them as system architects and information architects, as opposed to a pure UX or UI roles. So we're all familiar with the PM to design to engineering handoff, and we found that that handoff process is really broken because engineers don't get enough context about business, and designers don't have enough context about our systems, which makes them create these, elaborate structures that may take forever to make. Instead, we empowered our designers to be able to have systems level understanding so that they act more as system engineers and are able to make very logical engineering decisions. I'll show one example here first before I go to this. This is what a typical handoff document or Figma look like for the Pluto team. You can notice a few things. First, you will notice all of the UI that is there, but you will also notice that all the things in red are actually edge cases and states that our design team have thought about to be able to communicate to the engineering team. Our design team is required to be able to think through, okay, there could be this particular performance issue because we know that this particular system in our product doesn't work that well. There could be these error codes. There could be this state that a particular database can go in. Our design team comes from engineering backgrounds, engineers who moved on to become designers, and so they essentially have the ability to be able to communicate and put together a finite state machine of all of the states that can be there, such that the design team itself are empowered to make engineering decisions, while at the same time, when our engineers get this document, they know exactly what each one of the business problems are and are able to make decisions without the design and engineering team's help. What this allows us to do is to be able to go from PMs to designers to engineers in the most easy way, because now each one of these team members have utmost context about both the systems in Pluto, the business problem we're trying to solve, and how to go about solving that implementation problem. Okay? Cool. All right. One thing that I wanted to mention here before I jump off is that this kind of approach, I do believe, is the future of product management here. The new generation of PMs and designers are going to act more like systems and information architects. And I think Bassem in the morning today has mentioned that we cannot use technology effectively if we don't understand it. And this is the fundamental principle that I hope you will take away from it today, which is that if you are a PM or designer in the room, just know that this is the approach that most companies are going towards, where you're no longer operating at just at the high level. You will be empowered to be able to make decisions even from a systems perspective. Okay. The next few changes. Now that we have covered few things, right? We covered how to have scrapping PRDs and the Figma changes. The next change is reorienting towards a outcome-oriented planning. Now we talked about output versus outcome-oriented planning at the beginning. So let me explain that a little bit. Output-driven organizations focus on delivery first and are nervous about making sure what quantity of things needs to get delivered at the end of the sprint. Outcome-driven organizations instead focus on what customer, discovery, or revenue outcomes need to be completed to be able to mark the sprint a success. You work backwards from the outcome you're hoping to achieve, and it allows you to essentially create specific customer problems that you're trying to solve and have that be part of your sprint. When you start to do outcome-oriented planning, you will start to also put together various kinds of things that help you in your startup journey, because the outcomes may not ever fully always be revenue-generating outcomes. A revenue-generating outcome could be onboarding a particular customer, like an enterprise customer, by building a specific feature for them. Or you can have discovery outcomes, which is learning something new, like the WhatsApp bot that we said, by doing a particular behavior and having space for that discovery activity. Or you can have scalable revenue outcomes, which is the traditional sprint planning that we do, which is unlocking new features for the broader organization. Now, when you start to do that, one thing that will inevitably happen is that some consequences you will see that will make you question whether this is the right approach or not. The first thing that you will see is that all of your backlog grooming will likely slow down. And for us, that is completely okay. Because for us, the approach that we take with backlog grooming is that we don't do it. And what we do instead is that if it is important enough, and it will resurface over the next few cycles, and you will be able to prioritize it accordingly. Number two, you will find is that your sprint will start to become more fluid, and as the new information you work on, will be able to make changes to your outcomes based on that. Okay. All right. Okay. So now you have covered, the early stages of the nascent cycle that you're in. Hopefully you have a few customers and are now ready to scale up your company. When you're ready to scale up your company, you need to start making decisions here and org structures that help you essentially decentralize the execution that you do. And to do this, what we introduced in Pluto is the concept of a DRI. Some of you may have heard of it. DRI stands for directly responsible individuals. So when you are a company that has 20 plus people, you can start to see that you start to get decision making by consensus starting to creep up. Decision by consensus leads to huge time sinks getting everyone's opinion and prevents unique thinking from surfacing. So to facilitate this, we introduced the concept of DRI, which was famously introduced by Steve Jobs in Apple. A direct responsible individual is one who owns the entire outcome of a particular project. The more crude way of saying it is one neck to choke. They are the go-to person for this outcome of the project, whether that outcome is good or bad. Typically, historically, this used to be a very senior person or a product manager. But by changing the title to a DRI, what we allow you to do in the company is we allow anybody to be assigned as a DRI, anyone who is willing to own that particular outcome. So this prevents us from having shared ownership because shared responsibilities dilute ownership and lead to confusion. The DRI in Pluto makes all the decisions and owns the outcome of their entire decision, whether it's good or bad. In stage one, typically, the DRIs are the founders. Founders would make most of the decision, they would make the design decisions, etc. But as you scale up, we start to bring DRIs, other DRIs into the mixture. This can include your product managers, your design team members. Eventually, you reach a point where DRIs steep into your culture overall, and you can extend DRIs to engineering and operations as well. We have teammates within our company today where they are fully responsible for particular projects, and they tend to operate just like a product manager would, but they are from the engineering team. So I'm going to show you here, for example, each project that we work on in Slack has a particular Slack channel, and each Slack channel identifies a very specific DRI that is leading that project. On the right side, you can see my colleague Will is the product DRI, which means that he is responsible for all of the product decisions that needs to be made. He's also the backend DRI because Will is our backend and infrastructure engineer. So Will has taken the responsibility to be able to operate our cashback project, which is a very business-driven project, end-to-end, all the way from doing the financial modeling to working with the designers to be able to coordinate that, to also writing the back-end code and working with the two other DRIs, which is the front-end DRI and design DRI, to be able to execute on this project. That's an example of what happens if you empower your engineering teams and your design teams or anybody else and remove the title of senior this, senior that, etc., and instead move to an operating model where DRIs are owning the end-to-end outcome. To this day, this particular project was one of our most successful projects, and it was led end-to-end by our back-end engineer. Okay. Last thing, I know we're running short on time, that I want to talk about is as you scale the company, we've now covered a few things, right? We've covered how to structure your organization for decentralized execution using the DRI concept. We've talked about scrapping PRDs in favor of more fluid brainstorming and design iterations. We also talked about moving PMs and designers to be more of systems and information architects. And at the beginning, we talked about the what-if approaches to MVP development. But as you scale and move into larger and larger organizations like 30, 50, 60 X people, you're going to have to move away from some of these approaches that I have talked about. And you're going to have to move to a more fluid way of roadmap planning. All the approaches that I talked about, I talked about in the beginning, was that not all traditional methods are bad, but they are bad if you don't apply it in the right context. As of today, Pluto is an organization that follows a more strategic roadmap, whereby our company is big enough where we can now have multiple teams operating on different product management styles. We have one team that operates on more output-driven approaches, which is the traditional way of product development. And then we have teams that work on the outcome-driven opportunities, which was the approaches that I talked about today. In these approaches, the outcome-driven teams essentially take a very fluid approach to roadmap. This is typically what our roadmap planning looks like, whereby the entire organization's work lives in one board where we know each particular team that is there, what they are working on, and how to switch resources and teammates accordingly. By using this approach, we move away from quarterly planning to be able to move from a pretty much weekly planning that we do that allows us to change and iterate our roadmap on a weekly basis as we learn from our customer and as we learn from everybody else. I'm going to stop over there because that's my time, but I'm going to be there at the end of the talk if you want to dig into any of this a little bit more deeper. I know it was a pretty hefty one, but thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you, Mohammed.
Thank you.